Take them and turn them with me to James chapter 3, verses 13 through 18. So we'll be in James chapter 3, verses 13 through 18. And the message today is titled, The Way of the Wise. Last week, what we did was we talked about what James says about the tongue. Excuse me. The message was titled, Watch Your Mouth. Because our mouths are a big deal. You know, our mouths are the thing that the Bible says no one can tame it, especially our tongues. And the point that we made last week was the only way for us to tame our tongue is not in our own strength, but in the strength of God. He's the only one strong enough to tame our tongues. So we have to allow God to do that. But we also have to watch our mouth, guard what comes out of it. Because that's part of who we are. James has been talking about putting our faith to work. Your mouth says a lot about what and who you are. Especially your mouth tells you a lot about that person. And a lot of times what our mouths do is show what we're going to do after we speak. And so a lot of people know that what comes out of our mouths can sometimes be different than the actions that we exhibit. And so watching your mouth is important for us as believers. And so as James continues to talk about these actions, the work that must follow our faith, today he moves into how important wisdom is in terms of our faith, which is why the message is titled today, The Way of the Wise. So we're going to start with James chapter 3, verse 13, and read through the rest of that chapter and break that down and see what the way of the wise truly looks like. It says in verse 13, Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, of the devil. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. So here we move into the type of wisdom that's needed in order for us to live out our faith in a way that's pleasing and honoring not only to God, but pleasing and honoring to those around us. A lot of people could probably say, well, you know, a lot of times you'll hear how wise someone is by what they say. But more importantly, what James is telling us here is we see how wise people are by what they do. Because it's easy for you to say something without following that up with action. It's easy for any of us to do that. I can say how much I love God and how much I want to follow him all day long. But does my life reflect that? I can say I'm a wise man in terms of what God has given me to do in this life, but if my life does not reflect that through action, I can say how wise I am all day long. But all I'm doing is running my mouth. So when we look at what James says about that, we're going to start off with verse 13 where he says, Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. Wisdom requires action. Wisdom requires action. That's not a point on your outline, but I want you to think about that. It says, Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life. Do people know you're wise and understanding by the way that you live? Of course, sometimes they question that in me because of the way that I live. Why? Because I'm not perfect. None of us are perfect, right? We talked about that as well. The only perfect man is Jesus. So for me, looking at this passage going, yes, sometimes I make good decisions. Sometimes you can see that I live a good life because I make wise decisions. I do things that provide the best outcome, not just for me, but for those around me. See, those who are wise and understanding often live lives that are uncommon. Those that are wise biblically often live lives that are not the same as what the world expects of them. And today, even in the church, the world expects the church to live and behave a certain way. And if we behave biblically, that's uncommon to many churches. So those who are wise and understanding often live good lives, but they live good lives by deeds that are done in humility, and that humility doesn't just show up, it comes from wisdom. A lot of times we gain wisdom by what? By experience. By messing up. By making mistakes. A lot of us know more about God because we've messed up a whole lot of things in our lives that God has had to come back and fix. And that helps us to connect better with other people because we have messed up so much, we can understand where they are and connect with them and offer the wisdom and understanding that we've gained through the experiences that our choices have put us through. You know, one of my buddies is a pastor of a church called Above All Ministries, a ministry called Above All Ministries. I watched a sermon from him a long, long time ago. And one of the phrases he used is, "You see my glory, but you don't know my story." And that's where it comes from. Those who are wise and understanding, who've been through some stuff, that God has brought through some stuff, their lives look so different, so much more different than everybody else's. It is uncommon. Because why? You don't know what they have been through until you listen to the story that they tell you about what they've experienced. You see that good life that they live now, but that good life came at a price. That person's wise and understanding now, but there was a point where they were probably I'm going to say it in terms of me, not anybody else. Dumb and ignorant. So my life was that way at one time. I'm a bit more wise and understanding now. Still have a long way to go. But I can tell you this, my life looks different than a whole lot of other people. People would call my life uncommon to a lot of people. Why? Because I'm a bit wiser and a bit more understanding now than I was years and years ago. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life. Why? His life is now good because he had a bad life at one time. But that's what Jesus does, right? That bad life that you had, once you turn that life over to him, it is a good life. And God provides you with wisdom that we're going to talk about in a little bit that helps you to become more understanding. And when you do these things, kind of like we talked about, where there's sometimes we do crazy things according to the world, but it's because God has pulled us in a direction that we know that it might sound crazy or look crazy to you, but I know I'm trusting God, and because God's calling me to it, he's going to take care of that, and there's going to be a big blessing on the other side, not just for me, but for all those around me. That's uncommon, isn't it? For those who are missionaries who sold everything they've had and gone off to another country, that's an uncommon life. That's not a life that God calls everybody to, is it? Not all of us are called to be missionaries. But those people have done that because they've seen God do some things in their lives. And they've gained wisdom through the experiences that they've had with God. And they understand what God wants for them, and they just go out and do it. Looks crazy to the world. It is uncommon. But it is important and impactful. And that good life comes from humility. And humility, as it says in this passage, comes from where? Wisdom. Most people don't gain humility by being perfect, do they? Does anybody gain humility from being perfect? You gain humility from messing up. But don't you gain, just as we talked about a little while ago, when you mess up, that's when you learn, because God shows up. And so that humility is what is uncommon for a lot of people. If you look around our world today, is there more of an example of humility or pride? Think about it. Humility is uncommon, especially in the United States of America. Because the world is all about you. The world is all about me. Guess what happens when I make the world all about me? I mess up. Bad. And many times. And that's kind of what James is talking about as he keeps moving on in this. He says, the wise and understanding live a good life by deeds done in humility that comes through wisdom, which comes through the experiences that we have and the encounters with God that God brings us through. But he says this, but if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, where? That's deep down, right? That's stuff that most people don't often see, right? If you harbor that down in your heart, don't boast about it. This is the next part, or don't deny the truth. I'm not bitter. I don't want to do things that promote who I am or put me in a better position with other people. I'm talking to myself here. If you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't boast about it or don't deny the truth. Don't lie about it. Don't lie and say that you don't. Because that type of wisdom doesn't come from heaven. It's earthly, unspiritual, of the devil. Another way that some people would say that, especially church people, that's worldly. That's of the world. That ain't good, is it? See, when you do those things and you're not honest about it, or sometimes we even talk about the fact that gossiping stuff, right? We're bitter about something, so we're going to go share that with other people. I'm guilty of this as well. So I'm trying to help because I want somebody to understand where I am, but I'm going to say it in a way that makes me look better than somebody else. That's me being bitter in my heart. That's me having some selfish ambition of making sure people see me as better than what I am. That's not me being truthful or denying the truth, as James says here. That's me lying to myself and lying to other people. And you know how much that does for me? A lot. But in a negative way. See, that's what happens when we harbor those things, when we harbor bitter envy and we harbor selfish ambition, because that's not from God, that's from the devil. It doesn't do anything good for us. It does a lot for us. But it tears us up. It causes pain. It causes hurt. It causes a lack of trust in other people. The enemy knows that. Why would he want you to trust somebody? Why would he want you to not feel hurt? Because when you don't feel hurt, that means you can use the wisdom you have to do something good for somebody else. But if you're hurting, who are you focused on? You. The enemy knows that. That's why James says that doesn't come from heaven. That is earthly, unspiritual. It is of the devil. And he says, for where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find what? Disorder and every evil practice. What's down in your heart determines where you are. And so we can look at it like this. Cut it off. Until you're honest with yourself and with God, it will be difficult to enjoy a life of peace. Until you are honest with yourself and with God, it will be difficult to enjoy a life of peace. Why? Because where does that stuff lead you? To disorder and to every evil practice. What do we normally do when we're hurt and we don't want to deal with it? We mask that pain, right? What happens when we mask pain? We find something to do to cope with that, right? We find a coping mechanism. How many of you, when you're hurt, find a good way to cope, a good way to deal with it? Because there are good ways to deal with the hurt and the pain that we experience. But if you don't deal with that in the right way, if you're not honest with yourself about it and with God about it, it's going to be difficult for you to have peace in your life, because it says where those things are, there's disorder and every evil practice. You ain't doing nothing good if you're harboring envy and selfish ambition when it's about you, when you're comparing yourself to this person and that person and worried about what this one has that I don't have, or worried about what you're going to get from this and not the other thing. When there's envy, when there's selfish ambition, there's going to be all sorts of chaos in your life. There ain't no way you're going to enjoy a life of peace if you're not honest with yourself about that, then honest with God about it. Because you can be honest with yourself about it and say, yeah, I struggle with it, but not honest with God about it because you don't tell him and you don't ask him to help you with it. I've been there. I can say, yep, I know I'm struggling with this. The only way for me to get rid of it is to give it to God. And God's like, absolutely. And I said, well, you can't have it. It's mine. I'm going to deal with it because right now that's all I have and that's all I want. And I can tell you this, struggling with anxiety and depression, that's it. When I struggle with anxiety, when I struggle with depression, guess what? I'm being honest with myself. I know there's something going on, but God, I'll hang on. Let me figure it out. I can figure this out. And when I think I can figure it out, that's the selfish ambition that comes from me. And guess what that does? It leads to disorder and every evil practice. I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of good for anybody if I'm stuck in something that God doesn't want me to be stuck in. You're not going to be good for anybody if you're stuck in something God doesn't want you to be stuck in. If someone has hurt you, if someone has wronged you, how are you being honest with yourself about it, and how are you being honest with God about it? These are sermons that I get to preach to myself. This specifically is a sermon I get to preach to myself. But it also applies to all of us, because we all deal with stuff. We all deal with issues in our lives. You know, a lot of people, though, the way they deal with it is, why me? Why me? They don't ask it. You know, you can ask that question in two different ways. You can ask that question as a negative, or you can ask that question as a positive. Often we ask it in terms of the negative, which causes disorder. See, until we're honest about it, and until we're honest about it with ourselves and with God, it's going to be difficult to find peace in that situation. Because you can ask God, why me? What are you trying to show me? What can I do for someone else in the midst of this situation? So you can ask, why me? In a way that says, why me? What do I need to do for someone else? Or what do I need to do so that you can be elevated in this situation? Or you can ask, why me? I'm tired of having stuff over and over and over and over again. I had a conversation with an uncle of mine this morning, and my aunt's in the hospital, and he was telling me how he's been able to, use her time in the hospital to be able to pray with other people in the hospital and talk to other people about Jesus in the hospital. And he was in tears when he was telling me that. And that's one of those situations. It could be a why me, why my wife, get us out of this situation. It's more of a God, I know why me. Because people need to encounter you. And they will encounter you if I'm not focused on my ambition, what I can get from this situation, but what you can give to all of us in this situation. Sometimes that's a hard place to be because life hurts. Life hurts for all of us. But again, wisdom, heavenly wisdom that we're going to talk about in a minute, is what helps with that. Because again, he's saying this type of wisdom where selfish ambition and bitter envy come that's down in your heart, that's not wisdom that comes from heaven. It's not. When you think about that, who's in charge of things at that point? Who's in charge? A lot of times we are in charge. It goes back to that word when you talk about being earthly and unspiritual and of the devil, that worldly thing. That's worldly wisdom. That ain't good for you, ain't good for anybody. But what we need to use in all those situations is heavenly wisdom. Heavenly wisdom. Wisdom from above. And that's what he says in verses 17 and 18. The wisdom that comes from heaven, wisdom that comes from above, is first of all pure, then peace-loving and considerate. It's submissive, it's full of mercy and good fruit. It's impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. And so there's two parts to that. But the first question I want to ask you is this. When it says the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving and considerate and submissive and full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. And when he goes into peacemakers who sow in peace, raise a harvest of righteousness, who is the person that exhibits all of these characteristics for us? You can say it louder than that. Jesus, right? So if we have heavenly wisdom, we're going to be more like Jesus. And we're called to be more like Jesus than the devil. We're called to flee from him. But again, what it says is this: if you have all those things, if you keep all those things inside, you're going to have the disorder and the evil practices. But if you have heavenly wisdom, what does it say? There's peace. You become a peacemaker, and those who sow peace reap a harvest of righteousness. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about. See all those characteristics? When you gain heavenly wisdom, it's pure, peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy, and good fruit, impartial and sincere, not showing favoritism like we talked about a while back. And peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. Look at what we get from heavenly wisdom. How many of you would like all of those things in your life? You can raise your hands for that one. I know I do. How many of you want all those things from? Guess what type of wisdom you need to get that? Wisdom from heaven, right? And so this is what I thought about as I looked at that. See, heavenly wisdom provides a comprehensive business package, benefits package. Heavenly wisdom provides a comprehensive benefits package. How many of you have ever worked for a place that provided a comprehensive benefits package? That's a really good thing to have when you work for someone, right? Because nobody's required to give you a comprehensive benefits package, one that covers absolutely everything and more than just the basics of health insurance or retirement. It covers a whole lot more than that. Well, guess what? When you have the wisdom from heaven, that is all encompassing. That is the most comprehensive benefits package any one of us can ever get. But it even goes beyond our life here on this earth, doesn't it? So when you talk about a comprehensive benefits package, you're talking about an eternal package. You're going to get absolutely everything you need for any and everything. When you use heavenly wisdom, God's going to give you all the things that you need. And rather than disorder and every evil practice, there's going to be peace. You're going to be a peacemaker. You're going to sow peace. And when you sow in peace, you raise a harvest of righteousness. And that's what God does for each and every one of us through his son, Jesus Christ. He says, hey, I'm giving you all of these benefits through my son. And when you have that, the righteousness of God is going to rest on you, because the package that I give you is so comprehensive that nothing in this world can ever compare to it. So what type of wisdom do you want? Earthly wisdom that causes disorder and every evil practice, or heavenly wisdom that offers you to become a peacemaker and sow in peace and raise a harvest of righteousness? I want the heavenly wisdom package, please. I don't get it all the time, though. Do I? Do y'all get it all the time? Because sometimes we want the worldly wisdom package. We want what we can do for us and get rid of whatever it is that you can do for somebody else. Because right now I ain't worried about you. I'm just worried about me. Mm-hmm. Right, and that's what we get. In marriages, it happens just as well as in single people's lives. You know, I tell couples all the time, have you ever had a fight? Or you just better be careful, because when you get married, during premarital counseling, you go, you spent $50, I'm going to spend $50. You went hang out with your friends and play golf all weekend, I'm going to hang out with my girls, we're going to get pedicures, and we're going over wherever. Is that worldly or heavenly? You know, and we joke about that, right? But can I tell you how many arguments in marriages start because of things like that? Because it's no longer about each other, it's about me, self. And it's the same way with every other thing in life. And it starts when we're kids. It does. How many of you wanted something one of your friends had? How many of you wanted something your friends had and your family couldn't afford it? And so when you get married, guess what you're trying to do? Get everything that everybody else told you couldn't get, regardless of what your spouse says, isn't it? But seriously, that's what happens in life. And I'm saying that to married couples, not picking on married couples, but for single people, it's similar. Man, that dude's got a nice car. Look, when I was in college, the Fast and the Furious was coming out. How many of y'all knew a kid that wanted a car with a muffler that was bigger than the car itself? What are we going to do to try to get it? Credit cards. No, I'm serious. It's not just something that adults deal with. We do whatever thing we need to do to get what somebody else has, because we're not thinking heavenly, we're thinking worldly. And I can tell you, The Fast and the Furious was one of the greatest movies that came out at that time. Because I'm telling you, everybody that left that movie theater that night was fired up. Even if they didn't have one of them fancy mufflers, they left the movie theater trying to burn rubber. I say that jokingly, but y'all laughing. But that's exactly how worldly wisdom works. I want a horse. I want property. I want a bunch of horses. I'd like to get me a jet black Tennessee walking horse so I can just sit on it and just go all day long. If that was my ambition, my family would be in trouble. I'm serious. Y'all know I like motorcycles. If that was my ambition, my family would be in trouble. Because I wouldn't care anything about them. I'd go get me a motorcycle. Right? But if you're single, God says, hey, don't go buy you a house right now. Don't go buy a brand new car right now. But I need a brand new car, because that car's going to get me wherever I want to go. Used cars can do the same thing for a little bit less. And I say a little bit less because used cars ain't so cheap either. But when you start looking at the life that you live, what does that look like? Are you using earthly wisdom or heavenly wisdom? Because earthly wisdom, worldly wisdom provides you with all kinds of chaos. Heavenly wisdom provides a comprehensive benefits package that includes purity, peace, consideration, submission, mercy, good fruit, impartiality, sincerity, and peace. That's the way of the wise, to use heavenly wisdom. That's what James wants you to show by your good life, by deeds done in humility, through wisdom, because of wisdom. Heavenly wisdom, not worldly wisdom. Because I can use worldly wisdom all day long. Am I going to experience peace in my life because of it? Because we all know. How many of you know, yep, because you did something God told you to do, your life was so much easier. But when you knew God wanted you to do something and you did what you wanted to anyways, what happened? That's what James is talking about, right? Y'all don't need me to keep explaining to you what James is saying. There's two kinds of wisdom. One to get you this and one to get you that. It's hard raising kids, helping them understand that too. Regardless of what generation or what era your kids grew up in. You know, people say it's different raising kids now than it was back then. It looks different, but all the situations are still very, very similar. We have to be able to teach our kids how to use heavenly wisdom rather than worldly wisdom. And that is hard, regardless of how old your kids are. Our world needs more parents, needs more adults who use heavenly wisdom. Our world needs more people who use heavenly wisdom. They need more kids who understand heavenly wisdom. That's the opposite of what's stated in verse 15. Not from the devil, but from heaven. See, our wisdom, the wisdom that we use, leads to what? Righteousness. Leads to righteousness because it sows in peace. It sows in peace. The only way to be able to sow in peace is to be honest with who? Yourself and with God.
I'm sorry, Pastor.
Not a problem. Be honest with yourself about what's deep down in your heart. Be honest with God about what's deep down in your heart. Because again, it goes back to harboring bitter envy and selfish ambition. You need to be honest with it. Don't boast about it. Because that doesn't come from heaven. It's earthly, unspiritual, and of the devil. Do you want what's earthly and unspiritual and of the devil? Or do you want what is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, and submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere? What do you think the people around you need from you? Worldly wisdom or heavenly wisdom? See, when we talk about all those characteristics of wisdom from heaven, it said that looks like Jesus, right? And we're supposed to look like Jesus, right? So choose heavenly wisdom so that others get the opportunity to meet Jesus Christ through you. When you exhibit these things, when you live the way of the wise, when you live the way of heavenly wisdom, others will get the opportunity to meet Jesus Christ through you, through your good life, a life that's lived in humility because of heavenly wisdom. That should be all of our goals. That's the Great Commission, to use the wisdom from God to be able to help other people meet Jesus so that they can want to be like Jesus and accept a relationship with him because of what he offers, that full, comprehensive benefits package that even lasts throughout eternity. See, heavenly wisdom provides us the opportunity to show people that Jesus is our Lord and Savior. We can use worldly wisdom to do that too. But should we? Because you know that worldly wisdom causes you to mess up, causes you to sin, causes you to have to repent and ask for forgiveness and all that. I say all that because there's a whole lot that goes with that. But it brings you back to heavenly wisdom. But if you start with heavenly wisdom and lead with heavenly wisdom and continue in heavenly wisdom, the worldly wisdom is going to become just as any other sin. You're not going to want that anymore. You're going to desire wisdom from God. You're going to desire the wisdom that produces all of those wonderful fruit. And other people get to meet Jesus through you because of that. You want to fulfill the Great Commission? Choose heavenly wisdom. Choose the way of the wise. Choose to be like Jesus. Because that's what our world needs. You know, just as our bulletin says today, sow righteousness for yourself and reap faithful love. Break up your unplowed ground. It is time to seek the Lord until he comes and sends righteousness on you like the rain. God will send wisdom on you like the rain if you ask for it. Because let's be reminded of what James said in James chapter 1. He says, verse 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. If you want heavenly wisdom, you got to ask for heavenly wisdom. If you want to be more like Jesus, you got to ask to be more like Jesus. Because that's where people get the opportunity to meet Jesus Christ through you. That's where people get the opportunity to meet Jesus Christ through me. So when we choose the way of the wise, we get more and more opportunities to help other people meet Jesus. And our world desperately needs more and more and more and more people to help other people to meet Jesus. So let's leave here today choosing heavenly wisdom rather than worldly wisdom. Because that's going to make a difference in somebody's life in a good way. So let's bow our heads and pray.